Okay, cool. So my name's Emily Ryan, and I'm the director of the Commons, which in other times is in Spooner Hall, the building behind me here. And what the Commons really seeks to do is bring people together across areas of interest and specialization at the university and beyond the university to be able to have conversations around real world challenges that can best be informed by a multitude of perspectives and expertise. And I'm very proud that we've been hosting this series. This is now the third event in this series. We've been hosting together with Emily Taylor Center for Women and Gender Equity, led by Bulaong Ramiz-Hall and Meg Williams, and also the Center for Service Learning, led by Kate Kemper and Jamela Watson-Thompson. So this event follows one that we hosted in February around the census, and then one that we hosted in March around the voting process. It's not too late to complete your census still. It's not too late to register to vote still. So the intention for this series was really sort of two-part. One, to have a conversation to really help open up dialogue around different parts of democracy. And the second part was to really figure out how people can get more engaged or get more involved by giving them access points to that. So the format for this evening's event will be a moderated discussion, which will be, as I mentioned, led by Bulaong Ramiz-Hall, who's the director of the Emily Taylor Center for Women and Gender Equity. And I also wanted to just remind folks that we will have time for questions at the end, but if you don't mind just muting yourselves when, in the meantime, then if you have questions at the end, we'll take those. And you can submit them through chat, which Kate is watching, or you can unmute yourself and then we'll know to call on you. So. Take it away, Bulaong.
All right, thank you so much, Emily. I really appreciate it. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here this evening. My name is Bulaong Ramiz-Hall. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'm the director of the Emily Taylor Center for Women and Gender Equity, and I'm super excited to have this conversation today. Part of the inspiration of this Voting from the Margins event was sometimes we have this overarching conversation about engaging in the political process, engaging in voting, that seems to be very, for lack of a better word, colorblind or identity blind, or rather identity evasive, right? Where we refuse to look at the way specific policies and processes impact folks, specifically from their marginal identities. And so we have invited three amazing people today that are going to talk a little bit about who they are and their engagement in the political process and their relationship to voting or not voting. And then if you have questions, you're welcome to write them in the chat. There is also, you can also like raise your hand in Zoom. I don't want to assume everyone knows how Zoom works. So you can raise your hand. If you like something someone says, if it resonates with you, there are reaction buttons. You can clap, you can give a thumbs up. Yes, thank you, Megan, for displaying that. And so Zoom and this virtual learning space that we're in can feel really disconnected. And so we'll really encourage you all to engage in the ways that are possible for us. And with that said, I would like to turn it over and have my panelists introduce themselves. And what I'm going to ask is that you share your name, pronouns if you have them, and what your orientation is in political engagement. And so what is your orientation to thinking about your political process? Share whatever identities you feel comfortable sharing, and you might also share your relationship to KU. And so if I can have Juan Ramiro start, and then I'll pass it to Tezbah and then Shannon.
Thanks, Bulaong. Hi, everyone. Really excited to be here, and I see many familiar faces, which is really nice to see, especially early in the week. My name is Juan Ramiro Sarmiento, as Bulaong mentioned, he, him. I'm a former KU student. I was at KU between 2012 and 2017. I studied political science and international studies, and for me, I guess just to, in terms of my identities, you know, the package I have, the cards I've been dealt. I am a gay millennial Latino from a mixed status household regarding immigration. And when it comes to civic engagement and my orientation towards it, I am very much an advocate for voting. I think it's important from my point of view and my position in society. And yeah, that's what I have for now. We can dive in a little deeper later, but that's that.
Thank you, Juan. Juan Romero. I'm sorry.
You're good.
Tezbah?
Well, hello everyone. I'm Tezbah. Tezbah Smiley in the show. So in the slip, now play to never sustain here on the air this day. Kazani Edish Nala. Ade my take is a day and Nasha. They get about Hotan Edition. All continent So all that translation, my name is Tezbah Smiley. I'm the Meadow people for my mother. I'm the Spanish Mexican people, or the people who want it for my father. I'm the Towering House people for my maternal grandfather. I'm the Tango people for my paternal grandfather. I'm originally from Coyote Canyon, New Mexico, but I also call Piña, Arizona home as well. That's why I identify as a Navajo and a Navajo trans woman. My pronouns are she, they. And with my own civic engagement with voting, I've voted once when I was like 18, and all the way up to this point, I haven't seen much change. So I kind of stepped away from the voting process, just mainly because there's just a lot of false advertisement behind it, and just how colonial voting is, because it just reads for my own sake and the communities where I come from. And even though I come from a tribal government, I have a dual status. I'm first a tribal citizen, and then I'm an American citizen second. There's really not much change going on between both of my governments. So because I have two governments that I'm able to vote in, I do try to keep my voting processes with my own tribal government intact. But in terms of US government, I kind of stepped away from it, just mainly because of the binary system that's pretty much in place, which is very much like a draft of this binary system that we still run under as a very young country. With KU, I'm the grad student. I'm starting my second year as a graduate assistant. So yeah. Oh, I'm in the master's program here at KU. I'm also Indigenous Studies program here at KU, and I'm also a alumni of Pasco Indian Nations University, the sister college here in town.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Shannon.
Thank you. I'm Shannon Portillo. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am a Mexijew, so my mother's side of the family, I descend from Holocaust survivors, and my father's side of the family is Mexican American. So I'm a Mexijew who grew up in Kansas. I believe that there might have been two of us, me and my brother. There might be more. We might have a larger tribe than we know. I am a Virgo, which means that my birthday is coming up very soon. I will be a Young Democrat for the next 5 days. The Young Democrats, the Kansas Young Democrats endorsed my current political campaign, which I greatly appreciate. They told me that they only endorsed Young Democrats in the primaries, but they would be endorsing any age Democrats in the general, which is really nice because I won my primary, but now I will be any age Democrat in the general election. Voting has always been incredibly important to me. My parents walked hand in hand into every polling place and then often didn't vote the same. Now they do vote very similarly because of our two-party system and where the two-party system is at. But throughout my childhood, there were discussions of third parties in the House. There were discussions of conservative politics, progressive politics, all kinds of things, but there was always an insistence on voting. So I remember going to polling places with my parents as a young child and seeing kind of the different reactions that they got. My father as a darker skinned Mexican American man and my blonde haired, blue eyed white mother. So voting has always been incredibly important. This year, I decided to run for a local office, and that's been a really interesting experience. So I'm currently the Democratic candidate for the 3rd District County Commission seat here in Douglas County. I have really enjoyed the organizing aspect of it and kind of gathering with community and hearing what our priorities are and what our values are. And I'm really excited about the governing aspect of how we can make some real change at the local level. But it's also been a really eye-opening process. So we know that our community likes to see itself in a particular kind of way, but I woke up every morning this summer with racist and sexist messages and various social media accounts and that sort of thing. And so that's been not surprising, but still a pretty painful process to go through. So this has been my first time on this side of the electoral process, and it's been eye-opening. But I'm excited to be in conversation with you all today. Bulaong, you're muted.
I'm muted. I'm unmuted now. I said thank you for that, and sorry you had to go through that. But we appreciate you being here and sharing your experience. So we have about 45 minutes together. My vision is that we will talk for about 30 minutes, and we will also open it up in the last 15 minutes for Q&A. If folks have questions throughout the conversation, this is by no means a strict space. And so if you have questions and you want to unmute yourself and ask, or want to write in the chat, you do not have to wait until the end of the conversation for us to do this. So consider this a fluid and engaging space for you all. So I wanna go to thinking about barriers to participation. As you all shared a little bit about your identities. For some of you, voting is really important and was a value growing up. And then as Tezbah mentioned, voting is also this like kind of colonial process that has not garnered much systemic change for many in our country, especially those most marginalized. So talk a little bit about some of the barriers that you face, whether that's external or an internal barrier. Because I know as a Black woman, I'm often like, maybe I won't vote this year. Like, why would I engage in that? And that feels like an internal barrier that I'm still navigating. Do you all have that? And I'll, whoever wants to, like, we'll just popcorn, whoever wants to share first.
Well, if you don't mind, I would love to start talking about some of those external barriers as well as the internal barriers. So I recently wrote a paper that was in the Journal of Public Integrity with two amazing co-authors, Dr. Dominic Bearfield and Dr. Ramiro, around some of the ways in which public administrators are starting to kind of be folks who have to navigate some of these external barriers. So there have been some very kind of political policy changes that have shifted. So I grew up I first became an adult in Lawrence. So I was of legal voting age here in Lawrence, Kansas in a pre-Chris Kobach era. And so it was very easy to register to vote. And you filled out the registration, you got your registration, you went to the polls, you voted. We actually had same-day voting for a while in our state. I took my first academic job at George Mason University outside of DC. And so got to vote for President Obama in his swing state, which was very exciting in 2008. And when I returned to Kansas in 2013, it was a post-Chris Kobach era. And so voter ID laws had shifted in a really significant way. And at that point, you needed to have and still today, you have to have a birth certificate in order to vote, which I was born in Kansas City. So I had my passport, which is also on the approved list of documents for voting. And when I went to the DMV here in Lawrence, I was told that my passport wasn't proof of citizenship and was not allowed to register to vote when I came back, which the passport is very much proof of citizenship. It's how I get back in the country when I travel out of the country. It is a foundational citizenship document. And I don't know whether this was like intentional by the nice person working behind the desk at the DMV, or whether it was just someone who didn't really know what the rules were and what it looked like, because we had been saying the word birth certificate so often. Maybe they didn't know that a passport was a citizenship document. I know that my mom, who is a white woman, didn't have the same experience. We both moved back to Lawrence in the same year. So I think that there is this moment of discretion with all of these policies that becomes really difficult. So I do, like, our county clerk, Jamie Hsu, is amazing. So I went to the county clerk's office, registered, it was no problem. But I think that there are some of those real barriers in place, particularly in Kansas, when we think about voter ID laws and that sort of thing, that often affect marginalized folks more because sometimes when people use their discretion, they use it in ways that are really problematic.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Tezbah or Juan Romero, do either of you have thoughts?
I can jump in if I can. I think for me, the journey has been different. When I was an undergrad at KU, my circumstances were vastly different than they are now. Now I have more resources and I live in a different community. At the time I went to KU, I grew up in Wichita. And so that's where my family, where my permanent residence was. And I was on campus. And so for myself, I came from a low-income household, so we moved a lot. We never really had a stable address. And so for me, the longest time living at an address was when I was at KU, living there as a student. But I wasn't voting in Douglas County. I was going back home because that's where I was registered. Now the whole, not having stable housing for longer than a year obviously presents a challenge, because that's how you determine where your polling location is. And if you show up somewhere where you're not supposed to, then you're gonna get a provisional ballot, which at the time I didn't know was on a different class, and it wasn't the same as just voting like a regular person that is registered at their usual place. The other barrier was that I didn't have a car consistently when I was an undergrad, so I couldn't just go back and drive to Wichita, because that was gas money. If I went with somebody else, if I didn't have a car, then I wasn't gonna go. And you have the stress of undergrad as a first generation student, at least for me, speaking from my experience, and getting registered to vote wasn't a priority. I was more focused on making sure I was doing well in my classes or things like that, or how am I gonna pay for food or whatever it may be. Now that situation has changed because I've left KU. I'm in a vastly different situation because I have a job, I have more resources, I'm financially stable, I have housing. Now when I go registered, I've gone to the same location the last 2 years, and the people there, I know where I'm going. And that makes a huge difference. At least I don't have the same barriers that I did before. And I'll leave it at that for now, but it varies.
Thank you. Go ahead, Tezbah.
So I was born in New Mexico, but I vote from the state of Arizona. So I kind of flip-flop between states, and also between state and then federal voting. So it's a lot to juggle. But anyway, I remember voting, getting like my voting stuff in place, like when I was like 17, getting to 18. I was going to a off-reservation boarding school, like in a border town called Holbrook. Did my selective service stuff there, and then all of that. And the last time that I voted was like 2012. I was like 18. I was doing my associates at that college. And that was the last time I really took any, I guess you could say, pride. And I guess if they say using your voice. Ever since then, I've kind of stepped away from it. Kind of just analyzing things and things that, and also I've just let things pass me by. And yeah, but with tribal stuff, I think that's something that's more internal for me to be talking about. So, but in terms of,
yeah, Tezbah, can you share a little bit? Do you see a difference or experience a difference in the way elections are held for you with your tribe, within your tribe, as opposed to what happens in the general US elections? Is there a difference that you feel or that you experience?
So I'm about, dang, I should give everyone my PayPal. Anyway, y'all about to get a free lesson. So fun thing, so the Navajo Nation today, our government today is a blueprint of the US government, so we have a 3-branch system. And how our government was formed was through like 2 or 3 transition periods. And the way that the government was set up was more of like assimilating our people, and we don't operate under a constitution today. So So the first form of governance was called masjid, and that was like that's more of like a traditional way of governance prior to colonization. And in 1923, there was the business committee, and then it went to the business committee, and then it went to another committee. But these committees were founded in Shiprock, New Mexico, and these committees were made just to sign oil leases. So that's how our government was founded currently, well, in the 19th century. But anyway, or 20th century. But anyway, so today we operate under the IRA, the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934. And what that was that Navajo people were given the choice to operate under this blueprint three-branch system. So that obviously the executive, legislative, and the judicial branches, or we could form our own constitution. I think, I mean, um, don't don't get me wrong, but I think this is more of like of an anecdote because I took like, oh my gosh, quick story by the way. I took this Navajo Nation government class. It was 8 weeks, y'all, and it was like on Sundays from like 8 o'clock to 4. So, oh man, good memories though. But anyway, so the way that they did it back then was that it was either X was like yes, and then a circle was a no. So of course, like to a lot of like Native people that obviously most likely speak Navajo or their native tongue at first, of course that's going to be foreign, like knowing the X in a circle, especially all of that. So the people were kind of confused in that. So that's what I've heard was that's why we operate under the IRA. But we operate under like the 4-year voting system, just to answer your question, Bulaong. Sorry to ramble, but I just wanted to add that in there. But yeah, it's every 4 years. And the Navajo Nation specifically, we have 110 chapters. So those are chapters that serve local communities surrounding it. So there's a mass of different communities, and the Navajo Nation is bigger than 10 states here in the U.S. So
yeah, thank you for sharing that, and feel free to drop your PayPal in the chat. Juan Romero, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, you mentioned coming from a family of mixed status folks when we're talking about immigration status. And with that, I imagine there are a lot of people or community members around you who don't have the ability to vote, even if they wanted to. Can you share a little bit about the responsibility maybe that you feel or how that informs your engagement in the voting process?
Yes, definitely. I think when it comes to folks that originate from mixed status households, there is an added pressure to vote for those folks that can't. In fact, there was a campaign a couple years ago that maybe even more recently, and it's still ongoing, in terms of like adopting a DACA recipient and voting for them in a sense, like in support of new policies or candidates or whatever platform was going to advance progress for that particular demographic. And I mean, it's challenging always because in particular, or at least in my experience, that identity makes it really hard to ignore government or at the local level perhaps, but at the national level, it makes it so much more pressing because such small, not small, but the president decides a lot of that through executive action, as we have seen. For example, recently we had the Supreme Court uphold DACA, but because of the administration that we have in place, no new applications have been accepted. And so you have a contradiction and to a certain extent, the administration in defiance of the Supreme Court by not accepting applications, but there really isn't somehow to check them, to be able to force them into, because the Department of Justice is not stepping in as they would typically do. And so it's, for me, it directly impacts, while that decision by SCOTUS was welcomed, it is particularly important who becomes president this next round, because that executive order, you're either going to have the current president who will continue to dismantle DACA and go another round with the Supreme Court and try to get rid of it through a different means, utilizing different legal arguments to make sure he gets past the Supreme Court next time, or you'll have a different president that perhaps may pass it, and in spite of the fact that he originates from a previous administration that deported the most people in the history of the country and that established the infrastructure for family separations. And so that's where folks who are voting for either DACA recipients or are affected by that, you're not really voting for something that is inspiring, or you're kind of just voting to survive. And you're like, okay, well, I really need that executive action to pass regardless of who is in the White House. So who's gonna get me that? And so you're voting for what your interests how your interests are gonna benefit most. And so that's where I'm at. My sister and my brother and my mom cannot vote. And so I feel that obligation not only to vote on their behalf, but to ensure that they're safe.
Yeah.
But, that's just a little bit about that.
Thank you so much. And it's such a good segue into the next conversation. If I can ask Shannon to answer first, I'm curious, what are some of the platforms and policies that you are really paying attention to, and thinking specifically about the identities you hold? Like, what are the things that you're hoping to see in this next administration? And you could think locally or even nationally. What are some of the things that you're paying attention to?
Yeah, so the thing that really inspired me to run locally, it really was a live my values moment, because we've seen mass incarceration and the effects of mass incarceration in our country nationally, regionally, and locally. And what we saw is on Kansas Day 2020, January 29th, our county commission voted to expand our local jail against the wishes of our voters. And so I think that this is one where voting locally has a huge impact on mass incarceration, right? Local voters are determining whether we have more jail beds in our local community. And we saw that one of the local elections in District 2, Shannon Reed was running against the incumbent who voted for jail expansion, and she ended up winning that race by 3 votes. So that's something where, I mean, often we're voting to mitigate harm, not necessarily voting for something that we're truly passionate about. But in this case, we were voting to mitigate the harm of mass incarceration. And it came down to just 3 people who cast their votes. I think that locally there is a lot that we have to think through, and we affect our votes most effective at the local level, thinking about city elections, thinking about county elections, thinking about who's representing us in the Kansas State House. But also when we think federally, a big part of what's going to happen in this administration is we're going to see who's appointing Supreme Court justices. So we don't have a direct say in Supreme Court justices, but Juan Ramiro was just talking through a number of the issues that came down around DACA. And the DACA decision really came down to a really specific reading of administrative law. And the current administration can work around that and end DACA. What we need to see are folks in Congress who are going to vote to expand immigration and legal pathways to immigrants. And we need to see an administration that will seat reasonable justices. And so I think that when we vote, we're not just voting for a particular person, but we're voting for a lot of policies, and we're voting for who gets appointed to the judicial branch in these lifelong appointments that have a huge impact on our lives.
Yeah, thank you. Tezbah or Juan Ramiro, do you have any other policies or platforms that you're particularly paying attention to that you want to share?
I think voting is, John Lewis, not all Black people look the same, so. But they both died this year. But I was referring to John Lewis, who was a huge advocate of expanding voting rights. And since the gutting of the Voting Rights Act, as a result of the folks that we placed and that were appointed to the Supreme Court, that has been rolled back, and you've seen the closure of polling places all across the South and the former Confederacy, and particularly in states in the Sun Belt, that both in the Southwest and the Eastern United States, where you have increasingly diverse populations that have been tilting those statewide elections closer and closer. For example, you have Georgia, where Stacey Abrams was essentially robbed of the governorship, and had that happened in any other place in the country, in the world, that would have been considered election fraud, stealing an election, things that we see happening in Russia and the Eastern former Slavic Republic, or I'm sorry, USSR republics. And so I think that is also a long-term issue, regardless of what your thoughts are on voting. And I know there's some questions on the queue about what do you tell young people who don't want to vote because they don't think it's important. I think it is, everyone always talks about how this election is the most important in our lifetimes. But truly, as a student of history, I see this president and the current administration as a threat to democracy. I don't think that if we have this president continue for another 4 years, we're gonna have much of a democracy left compared to what we already have. We don't have a perfect democracy. We don't have a multiracial democracy. What we do have is the means to get to that point. And if this president gets another 4 years, the Department of Justice is already unrecognizable. There is no checks for this administration, which, and the absence of national elections is the only safeguard that we have. And so if what you can tell those 22-year-olds or however old they are, whatever the age, I think it is imperative that people vote this time around, because we may not have a democracy in the sense that we have now. As again, I repeat, as a student of history, what you're seeing is a dismantling of the freedom of the press, the dismantling of our methods to vote, our mechanisms to have free and fair elections. Free and fair, you know, you can argue what that means today, but what we do have is in danger. And so in the next 4 years, it might very well be that we may not have another election. And so that's not to be an alarmist, that's just objectively what you see throughout history, what the next step is. And so if you know, I studied this at KU, the Dictator's Handbook, and I'll stop talking for a little bit now, but that we just see those things happening, and I don't think people realize how close we are to the precipice. Dictatorship and authoritarianism is like day and night. Once you have that happen, it's gonna be really hard to dislodge someone once they've taken power. And I don't think people realize how close we are to that.
Tezbah, were you gonna share something? I saw you unmute.
Oh yeah. I think I acknowledge the privilege of having, you know, a birth certificate, the rights to vote, and all of that. But it's interesting. So where I come from, they talked about how, well, like grandmas, like in the 80s, 90s, they always talked about something in the future of like how this country or how folks are going to be in the transition of like the world ending. And just a quick anecdote real quick. When I was doing my AA, there was a lot of different stories that were told to me, cultural stories, just about certain monsters that followed us into this world currently. And it's sickness, poverty, lice, hunger, and what was the last one? I forgot. But it was weird just reflecting like this over this past summer about COVID and how I was sitting in those classes like at 7, 8 in the evening, because that's how long they would usually last. And didn't really think about like sicknesses, and then now kind of seeing like the sicknesses going, or sickness with COVID, And then with the voting thing, and obviously with the very heightened social political atmosphere right now, it's kind of, well, for myself, it's odd that those stories are really coming to life now and all of that. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. And like Juan Ramiro spoke to, there was a question in the chat, I'm not sure everyone can see it, from Precious Porous. What are your thoughts for younger, under 25 folks who don't want to vote, has a 22-year-old nephew who says it doesn't matter? Yeah, and so I think that's a big question, and something Shannon wrote in the chat was, you know, when we go vote in these November elections, there's also these local elections on every ballot. And so what does it look like to organize and to mobilize in your corner of the world? And I think that really changed my orientation to voting. And so I recognize that this year is the first year ever I'm voting in a red state. Connecticut, I could really throw away my vote. It wouldn't matter much. You know, Connecticut's almost always going blue. I admittedly definitely voted for Jill Stein because I refused to vote for Hillary Clinton. And it didn't matter, right? And so that's a risk I wouldn't take living in Kansas now. And so I think it's knowing your community, knowing where you are, knowing, you know, how your one vote can impact, right? You know, what Shannon said, 3 votes, like that, when you look at the numbers, that's huge. That is huge, right? That makes such a big difference in the lives of so many people. And so really helping young people see themselves as part of a larger community and a larger kind of mobilizing effort, I think is really helpful, especially for folks who don't want to engage in the process, because the Electoral College is shit, right? And so we do know that to be true. And so it's like, where can we actually make change where we are? Are there any other questions? It's 6:39 and I'd like to open it up. Are there any other questions or reflections that people would like to share? And if our panelists have anything else on their spirit that they'd like to add as well?
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question. My name's Chris Oliveda Ethan. I think that right now we've had a lot of folks, and I think this is a little bit of what kind of what Bulaong was getting at.
Chris, can you yell?
Oh no, not again.
It's just, you just sound far away.
How about I pause? I'm going to figure out my microphone and somebody else can.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions?
Well, while Chris is figuring out his microphone, could I just reflect a little bit on what you said, Bulaong?
Yes, please.
I think this goes along with the age question that Precious and Joey put out there, and Juan Ramiro recognized his millennial status when he did his introductions. I'm a millennial as well. Millennials are now not even the youngest voters, right? We still see a lot of millennial bashing that goes on in lots of places, but Gen Z voters are voters. We're starting to see a lot of Gen Zs become old enough to vote. And I think between Gen Zs and millennials, we're seeing a real shift in some of the electoral goals that are happening, and that mobilizing really matters. So what we saw in this most recent primary, not only did it come down to just 3 votes, but 40% of the folks who voted in our most recent local primary had never voted in a primary before. And so I think it's really easy for people to think that their individual vote may not make a huge difference. But when we see the massive numbers that are coming out and the organizing that's happening by younger voters, we can see real shifts and real changes. And so I saw in the chat that, I mean, we have a chance to elect a Democratic senator from the state of Kansas for the first time since 1932. The only way that that would actually happen is if we have a lot of young voters come out to the polls. We have a chance to keep a queer Native woman in Congress. We have a chance to send a Latina woman to Congress. Like, these are things that happen when we see big turnout, but those individual votes may feel like they don't matter, but when all of those individual votes add up, they can make some huge changes.
Which I might add, it's incredible that that's where we are today, that is that the entire congressional delegation candidates for the Democratic side are all women, who of color. And I never saw that coming when I was at KU. And then now we're in this situation. So I've been texting a lot of my friends from Wichita being like, hey, we may actually have a chance to elect someone to the Senate and a number of other seats. So like, this is the link to get registered. And they're like, oh, actually, because they have this perception that Kansas is a red state and that their vote federally doesn't count, which honestly has been true for a long time. But this is not the case this time around. And so I think it's really important to push back against that and send them the link. Don't just be like, get registered to vote. No, but people will be more likely to register. If you send them the link and you put it right in front of them and follow up and be like, hey, did you register before the deadline? Because every vote is gonna count in that election, which is rare.
Thanks for that. Chris, how you doing?
I don't know, you tell me.
You sound great. Go
Okay,
ahead.
so the thing that I've been thinking about, again, my name is Chris Oliveda, he, him. So I think that we have spent a lot of time and have spent a lot of energy and have seen a lot in the news, the discussions related to folks who feel like they have to choose the lesser of two evils. So I know we spent some time talking about local government, right? But when people think about the presidential election, it often comes from this really bipartisan framework. And so people feel like, I don't want to vote for these two folks, right? So Bulaong said, I was in a place where I could put that third party candidate on my ballot and feel confident that, you know, it is what it is. But in other places, I think that folks really struggle to make peace with that, right? Knowing that maybe they live in a place where that vote actually does matter, but they still feel like they have to choose the lesser of two evils, whatever that means. So how do we engage with folks who are feeling that pressure to vote, but don't want to vote red or blue, but still convincing them to engage in the political process in this way?
I mean, I think that I love what Emily just said, primaries, yes, everything for that. I think it's also structurally, the United States is something that a lot of modern democracies aren't. So like we're designed to be a two-party system. There are third parties, but the ways that third parties have to get on the ballot, it takes a lot of organizing and a lot of resources to even show up on the ballot. So the chances of a third party becoming a major player are just structurally unlikely in our system. Most other modern democracies are set up to be multi-party systems. We're set up to be a two-party system. I think that for me, this goes back to, everything always goes back to local, but the parties are not actually monolithic things, right? Parties are actually organized locally. And so we just saw new elections for the Douglas County Democrats that brought in more progressive leadership there. I think that this is something where we can organize within parties to kind of shift party politics, and that's where the primaries come in. For this particular election right now in 2020, I just want to echo what Juan Ramiro said, that we need to consider what will happen if we don't vote for that kind of lesser of two evils. Because I think that many folks thought that the current administration kind of wouldn't be that bad, it wouldn't be that different, but we've seen some really intense structural changes. And in lots of ways, that's come through trying to cancel the DACA program, but that's also come through judicial appointments, that's come through holding up particular legislation, that's come through an agenda where during the RNC's convention last week, they actually didn't even put forward a new platform. Their entire platform was, we support the current administration. And that's worrisome to me. So I think that right now, there is something to be said for, it's okay to vote against something as long as you're casting a vote.
I also think when it comes to the current choice that we have before us, it's a matter of who we are choosing to hold accountable. And so right now we're not being able, like we can't hold the president accountable. We've reached the zenith of accountability measures that we had, which was impeachment, and in many ways that allowed him to be unrestrained because what's he gonna respond? He's gonna be like, well, what are you gonna do, impeach me again before the election? And that is the only method that we have to hold him accountable. Whereas with the Biden-Harris ticket, it's in a way to get a footing versus drowning in what we have today. You get a footing and then you continue to push for progress and what you want to see happen. Because I think I often think of it as an inside-outside game. You have folks on the outside that are pushing through direct action and protest, which is very much valuable and one of the tools along with voting. And then you have the inside game, which is folks that are a part of an administration and that may be elected themselves, that are internally pushing, who benefit and have cover when the outside game, the outside folks are pushing for, because then you can leverage that to say, look, you should really appoint, if say Biden would get elected, and we were pushing for a more progressive EPA administrator to safeguard what has happened to our environment, or reverse what has happened to environmental policy in this country over the last 4 years. Having people marching for, like the Sunrise Movement, for someone more progressive or for better policies, or someone that would carry that out at the federal level being appointed by the Biden administration, you could accomplish that through pressure, either both internal and external. And I don't think we're going to be able to do that with Trump, because no matter what type of pressure you apply, you're just not going to get that. And so I think being able to present it as you're going to get a footing so that you're not drowning anymore, and then we'll take it from there because the fight doesn't stop, versus democracy ends. I think that's a very good way to frame it, because that's how high these stakes are. And people, I find that when you really place it in that choice, and then they're more likely to get up and feel the urgency.
Thank you for that. Are there any other questions from audience member for any of the panelists or for each other?
Can I just ask one verbally instead of?
Yes, please. Go.
So a couple of you spoke earlier to barriers in place in terms of or like getting to the polls or getting to the proper polling place or things like that. I wonder if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about like different modes of voting, like whether it's advanced voting or voting by mail, or how those may or may not present challenges or easier access.
So I would be happy to talk about that a bit. Different states have different kind of terminology and different processes for this. And so I think that is one of the things that becomes really difficult. So elections are administered at the state level, and really they're administered locally. What we saw here locally is that with the kind of increased focus on mail-in ballots because of the pandemic, we saw a huge increase in voter turnout. And I would say that hyperlocally here in our county, that was in large part to Jamie Hsu, our county clerk, pushing out applications for mail-in voting. I think at the state level, our Secretary of State's website is really hard to navigate, but we have a nonprofit at the state level, ksvotes.org, that makes it really easy to register and to request a mail-in ballot. So I think that the mail-in voting option has made it much easier for folks to access the polls. What we saw across the state in 2018 is a closing of a number of polling locations. And when polling locations close, they're more likely to be closed in neighborhoods of color. And what we have in our state is a lot of broad open spaces. What we don't have is a robust public transportation system in a lot of spaces. And so it can be really hard to get to the polls. One kind of potential positive that will come out of this pandemic is an increased reliance on mail-in voting. And I hope that this is something that is here to stay. I spoke very fondly of my childhood and walking to polling places with my parents. I love getting my I voted sticker and wearing it all day throughout election day. But I was pleasantly surprised to get 2 I voted stickers in my mail-in ballot this year. So I wore one the day that I put it in the mail, and everybody on Zoom had to see me sport it all day. And I wore one all day on election day. I'm sure that was a fluke and they weren't supposed to have 2 stickers, but it was a nice bonus for me. So you still get the sticker even if you do the mail-in. What we're kind of seeing now is with issues with our post office, you want to make sure that if you are voting by mail, that you put that in the mail really early. And you can request your mail-in ballot and then take it to your polling place. And when you turn it in at a polling place, you can ask for a sticker very nicely from the nice poll workers who are there. We also have a number of ballot drop boxes. And our governor just today was pushing for more ballot drop boxes throughout the state.
Thank you for that, Shannon.
I think
I was going to say there's a note just in the chat if people didn't see it. If KU students are registered to vote in another city or state, they need to request a mail-in ballot sent to their KU address. So if there are any folks registered to vote in another state, just know that you have to send in a request to get your mail-in ballot.
And then lastly for me, I think today is National Poll Workers Day, September 1st, I think. And one of the things that we're confronting with the pandemic is that, typically poll workers are older folks who may be retired and have more time on their hands. And so this is my shameless pitch to say that if you are able to and have the time to try and see if you can volunteer locally or to be a poll worker, because you are going to have a lot of these folks that typically would do it, but because they don't feel safe, rightfully so, given the pandemic, and they might be at higher risk, they're not going to be available to help administer the elections locally in a volunteer manner. So if you can, I know I'm going to try to be a poll worker here in Kansas City, but I think, or tell others who may have the time to do it, that would be helpful.
All right.
Oh, you get paid. I did not know.
Other notes?
Yeah, you get paid.
Pays $130 for the day. It's great. So we're gonna pull some of these links that were shared in the chat and we'll post them to our Facebook event page. And so they'll live there. And if you wanna go, I just went on and I registered my husband to vote in Kansas. It was really quick and easy, yay. I said, Kansas needs our vote this year. Connecticut will be fine. And to learn about your candidates, vote411.org. So these are all really, really helpful. Thank you so much. Are there any last comments from any of the panelists or any audience members? All right. I want to share that the Emily Taylor Center this fall is doing our first ever collaborative zine project. It's themed The Feminist Agenda, and we are asking for contributions from our community to do a zine page. It can be a drawing, a poem, writing, whatever, about what your feminist agenda would look like, what your feminist political platform would look like. And then we're going to have a big kickoff of the zine, the collaborative zine. It will be digital in October so that it's out before the election, just to get people's brains moving about what they want to see come November. So if you're interested in contributing to that project, you can reach out to myself or Megan Williams. You can visit us at emilytaylorcenter.ku.edu. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, and we will create, by we, I mean Meg, because she's amazing. We'll create a to-go little zine making kit that you can pick up and make your own page to contribute to our zine. So if that's something you're interested in, please reach out. It is going to be awesome. Salka, thank you so much. We'd love to get something from folks at the museum. And we appreciate you all engaging in this conversation and hope that it has your brains moving and feeling really excited, maybe a little nervous about the upcoming elections, and having you thinking about how you can engage in the political process, even if it's not voting, but maybe inspiring others or running for local office like Shannon did, and living your values. I really love that, right? What does it look like to live your values in the political process that we currently have, as flawed as it may be? So thank you all so much for joining. Emily, do you have any final thoughts, any upcoming things that you want to share from the Commons?
I just wanted to share, Meg put in the chat the date for the next one in our series on the feminist agenda on October 6th. So, and also Chris made a point about maybe we should do this again sometime right before the election. So, I mean, if people feel that, you know, like, let's chat and we can figure that out somehow. So,
yeah. All right. Thank you all so much for joining, and have a wonderful evening.